Well, good afternoon, everyone. If you're just joining us, we're about to kick off. We're just going to wait a couple of more minutes for people to join. We've already had our first question, Matt, before 2 o'clock. That's a record.
God, here was I hoping we'd get an easy start. So Aman Singh asks, I'll do this quickly before we start actually. Can mature applicants get into Oxbridge? He's 23, or she, I suppose, we don't know. It can happen. Obviously you apply on more or less the same terms as people who are 17 or 18 do. The big difference for a mature applicant is obviously you've been doing something for 5 years. So it's important to show what that thing is and why it makes you well suited to Oxbridge rather than another university, as the competition for places, it's not like they take a specific number of mature applicants. So it's all the more important to have something interesting to put forward about yourself in that situation. I've met people who were mature applicants at Cambridge when I was there. There were a few people who had served in the Israeli Defense Forces. There was someone who'd been an actor, there was another one who'd been a model, things like that. So it helps to have something interesting in the last few years you've got to sort of flesh out your application. I don't know if you've got anything to add there, Rohan.
No, I think that's pretty much covered it. The other thing is obviously there are mature colleges that you can apply to.
Yeah. I can see Aman has asked some further detailed questions. It may be best either we'll have a look at these at the end, or if you want to get in touch via email with us, we'll share that with you as well during the course of the presentation, as if your questions are fairly specific. Obviously it's easier for us to deal with it one-to-one rather than one to, and we are 1 to 68, 69, gradually ticking up. So yeah, if you've got any really specific questions about your personal circumstances, do get in touch directly and we'll be able to answer them better that way. Thank you, Aman. As you can see, Aman's been using the chat function. There's also a Q&A function. The Q&A is slightly easier for us to use, but both are fine. You had a haircut, Rohan. You're looking very dashing.
Oh, thank you. No, it's just it's actually Diwali today, so I've made the effort with my hair.
Oh no! So this is the embarrassing thing. I thought you'd had a haircut, but actually you've just washed. Well, happy Diwali, Rohan, and to all of our other attendees.
Matt, can you hear me?
I think we all can.
Oh, that's good. I can't. It won't let me share my video.
Let me see if I can turn you on. Don't know if we went through. Here we are. Make co-host. That's the button. You should be able to turn your video on now. Anyway.
Perfect. There we are.
There you are. Here's Will. You can have a brief look at his lovely face, and then we'll transition into the presentation, which I think we'll do now. If that's all right with everyone, let me get that running. In an exciting innovation, we have subtitles now. So if I appear to have said something funny, please let me know. We haven't had any rude mishaps yet, but it is fun. So you can look forward to that over the course of the presentation. But yeah, just to introduce us, my name is Matt. I look after our research here at UniAdmissions. And we've also got Will, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Will. I'm the head of consulting at UniAdmissions. So, speak to will probably be about 1,500 students and parents this year alone. So obviously I get to learn from a lot of people's experiences and will be advising for lots of people in different situations. So if you have questions, it's likely that they're ones that I can answer.
And Rohan.
Hello everyone. So my name is Rohan. My background is I did medicine at Cambridge, which is why I ended up feeling all the science and medical questions. So I started UniAdmissions. You probably read one of my books. Essentially, we've covered the entire admissions process from start to finish. My job is to essentially look after the whole of UniAdmissions and ensure that we sustain our record success numbers and continue to improve upon them.
There you are. If you want to get in touch with any of us directly, the best thing to do is to visit the website, uniadmissions.co.uk, and book a consultation. I believe we've got slots open all weekend with Will or Rohan or Ryan or anyone else who happens to be on the phones today, maybe even Mia, and they'll be able to answer your questions one-to-one and in much more detail than we can manage here. What we're going to try to do is give you an overall impression of how things are working, and that you can then from there build on that with specific questions when you come back to us, but to kind of give you a general overview of the process and what we've been doing. So to start things off, I want to share a few highlights of our year so far with you. This is the busiest time of our year, so obviously a lot of these numbers are well, probably inaccurate by now. We've worked with around 250 students this year, a little more than that, I believe, but I'm sure that number's going up each week, Rohan. And we've worked with we think over 1,350 tutors. Again, I haven't verified that number today, but I expect, again, it's gone up. And I'm sure we're above 5,900 hours studied, because that was from last week's presentation. So I'm sure we're well on our way to 6,500, maybe even 7,000, as that wouldn't have incorporated the last bit of data we had on admissions tests. I'm sure they're working hard on their interviews as well.
Yeah, there was more than 350 hours actually last week alone.
There you go. And I didn't work any of them. So just to fill you all in on a little bit of what we've been up to as well as that, I lead the research around here, which is targeted at making sure everything that we present in our teaching is, as accurate and up to date as it can be. So among the things we worked on this year, there weren't any open days, which is disappointing, as that's one of our favourite sources of information. But they did take place virtually online. So we did spend, Barbara and I, nearly 3 days stuck on Zoom in various meetings. We've also opened up new sources of freedom of information data, which has given us really helpful statistical insights into how Oxbridge admissions work, which have also allowed us to update all of our resources. So if you had the good fortune to work with one of our books or with us directly during the admissions test period, which finished about a week ago, all of those resources will have been bang up to date with any changes to the tests. And they love changing them. And we're also providing targeted help for newly computer-based exams. So that was something we were really focused on last week, and it's something we'll talk about later in terms of helping students with the computer-based interviews. So just show a few examples. Here is the GCSE data we were able to gather. We have quite a lot of this stuff. So if you're interested in what the average GCSE scores for various subjects are, admissions test scores, things like that, do get in touch directly over email with us or in the consultation, as I can't get hold of these spreadsheets while also doing the presentation. So it's really tricky to try and answer your questions live. We also were able to get this wonderful clip from one of the open day sessions, which I think is really helpful in reassuring parents that the approach they've been taking is the right one. So hopefully this will play.
I suppose if you are extremely interested and excited by things that are not related to the subject of English, like sport or music or something like that, that's great. But we're probably not that interested actually in that element of your well-rounded self.
I'd like to play this for each of our sessions just to reassure parents and students that you don't need to rush off and start a charity or try and do your Duke of Edinburgh's award in the next week before the interview. What you need to do is prepare for the interview. None of that other stuff actually matters as much as people might think. So talking about what matters and what doesn't at this stage, Rohan, if you could talk us through the famous pie chart.
Yeah, so this is it really varies on the course and the university that you're applying for.
Looks like we're having trouble keeping hold of Rohan.
Is it his connection?
Components for your application. So typically students come to
I think it is. Rohan, we're losing you. I've turned off his video. Hopefully that'll help.
Yeah, that might help. It's always difficult to
Sorry,
know if it's them or us, or them or you.
It's exciting, isn't it? Rohan, you went all muddy and underwater there for a second. Do you think you could start again? I've turned off your video. That should improve the signal.
Okay, sure. So as I was saying, we get lots of inquiries from parents who are a little bit confused as to how the application process is weighted. So the general rule that we tend to advise is the rule of threes, which is 30% of your score consists of your admissions test score, 30% of your interview, and 30% of your exam grades, which is essentially your GCSEs. And then everything else is 10%. So things like personal statement, your school reference, any intangibles like, for instance, if you row for your county, if you play a musical instrument at a high level, all of that is great. And obviously universities like to see that, but it won't make a tangible difference to your application. And the only exception to that is, of course, if you play sport at extremely high level, such as play rugby for England under 18s, in which case there are scholarships and entry positions available. The big caveat to this is obviously if you're applying for a course such as biology at Oxford or chemistry at Oxford, or courses that don't require an admissions test, then the 30% for the test score doesn't apply. Obviously that gets split out. But this is generally a good baseline rule. So if you're applying for 2021 entry, there's nothing you can do about your exam grades, and there's nothing you can do about your test score if you already sat it. So really now it's the interview performance that will determine whether you succeed or not, particularly if you're going to Oxford, where actually when everyone who gets invited to interviews is essentially in the same boat.
Fab. Thank you, Rohan. As Rohan says, the thing to remember, of course, is that you've already locked in the personal statement, the exam grades, the admission test score, all of that's done now. But no one gets in without an interview. So you've still got, if you get that interview invitation, you've still got every opportunity to make the difference. So as far as resources we can provide go, we can recommend Rohan's book. He's written a lot of books. This is my favorite, which is the Ultimate Oxbridge Interview Guide. This is a book we update every year with the latest information that we have based on our research. And you can find that on Amazon, or that's something we provide as part of any program you take on with us. We very much recommend that if you're trying to start your preparation, as that'll be a great resource, as well as what we can provide directly. So what is it that we can provide? Well, the first thing we want to do is to sort of give you all a sense of how the process works from here on out. So the question is, will you be invited to interview? Rohan touched on this a moment ago. The chances really depend on which course and which university you've applied for. So because there isn't an admissions test for chemistry at Oxford interview almost everyone, something like 93% of people last year. But computer science, where there is an admissions test, they'll interview a much, much smaller group of people, maybe only 11%. So if you get to the interview for chemistry to Oxford, that doesn't really tell you very much about your chances. However, if you've got to the computer science interview, you're down to maybe the last, 1 in 2, 1 in 3 chance. So that gives you an idea of what your probabilities are like if you like to worry about that sort of thing. The other thing to know is about the differences between Cambridge and Oxford medicine, which I know is your specialism, Rohan.
Would you like me to go through now?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So this Cambridge medicine and Oxford medicine, the way they shortlist applicants is very different. And actually the principles of this can be but very easy to demonstrate in medicine. The way Cambridge will shortlist, essentially they'll invite most applicants, as Matt's already said. Oxford will use a combination of your GCSEs, i.e. the percentage of GCSEs A star or 9s and 8s, as well as your BMAT score. And what they'll do is essentially the higher your BMAT score is, the less percentage GCSEs that you need at A star. Contrastingly, and on the flip side, the more GCSEs you have at A 8 or 9, lower your BMAT score needs to be. So it's purely mathematical rather than kind of a subjective thing. It's very objective. It's essentially done by a robot, or essentially done by a spreadsheet rather than kind of a human going through it. Which is why it's really important to understand that and sometimes students come to us asking, well, which university should I apply to? your GCSEs can actually make a big difference as to whether you get shortlisted or not. If you are applying for 2022-23 entry, and you do have a particularly low GCSE, sometimes we get students with 8s and 9s in pretty much every subject, and then they've had a bit of a nightmare and had a 6 in physics or something like Spanish. Please contact us in advance, because sometimes if you're considering about Oxford medicine or some other Oxford courses, it can actually be helpful to reject that grade to ensure that you maintain your percentage of A stars. And that's not widely known, but it needs to be handled carefully. But that's a separate discussion.
Yeah, Rohan knows much more about GCSEs than me. He has the great advantage of having done them substantially more recently. The other thing to know is that Cambridge don't tell us how many people they interview, but they do interview roughly 70% of people, depending on the subject. So while we'll provide various figures for Oxford interviews, we simply don't have the information from Cambridge because they don't release it on that basis. I've asked and they won't do it. So how are the interviews going to work? Obviously, we have limited information so far because we're still waiting for the invitations in most cases. But we can tell you what we do know, which is that all the interviews for Oxford and Cambridge are taking place online. The software they're using is yet to be confirmed. My latest information is that it'll probably, for Oxford, be on Microsoft Teams, but I'm still investigating that with the contacts I have at Oxford. This is the most exciting topic in the office at the moment, as you can imagine. And we know the dates for Oxford as well. They've confirmed that. And so those interviews are running from the 7th of December through, I think, until the 19th. So for the second and third weeks in December. The Cambridge dates, we haven't had those confirmed yet either, is the best of my understanding, but they'll probably be at more or less the same time. I know that Cambridge is sometimes a little later, but I don't imagine there'll be a huge difference, and we should find out in the next few days. Cambridge Law have said that anyone taking the Cambridge Law test, and I expect it'll be the case for other pre-interview assessments, will get sent the information for that from the 23rd. So we're expecting to have the interview invitations popping through people's inboxes or post boxes next week, if they haven't started already. And we know that the non-Oxbridge medicine interviews are from the end of November onwards, and those again vary from university to university. So we don't know exactly what Southampton are doing relative to Bristol, relative to Guy's King's Thomas's. But I'm sure that we'll update people if we have any information on those and they get in touch directly. Oh, it's a lot of speaking, I'm sorry. So how do the interviews themselves work? So there are a lot of myths that circulate around about the interviews. They're actually much more structured than you might think. The universities have become much more strict in recent years about what can and can't be asked in the interview. And the panel of interviewers will often be 2 or 3 people. And part of that is so that they can keep an eye on each other and make sure they're doing things properly and not doing anything too weird or outside of the agreed rubric. Every interview gets graded on the same day, and all of those grades are audited internally. So if the interviewers on the panel disagree about things, then things will be checked. It's all very thorough and transparent. Big changes here compared with when I was interviewed, is my understanding from the people I've spoken to in the know. As you'll remember, back in the day, there was a lot of talk about tell me about a banana and why a manhole covers round and cryptic questions about polar bears. They don't do that anymore. That used to be the done thing, but they've really strongly moved away from that. And so the interviews are much clearer and more sensibly structured. So don't worry about someone asking you a really wacky question once you get in there. That basically doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and just to say, we do get lots of parents who are quite concerned with, will my child get asked some obtuse questions? They will never be asked out of context, and I think it's important because the media loves to kind of blow these out of proportion. So in my interview, for instance, I got asked, what's the weight of the Earth? They didn't actually expect me to know the weight of the Earth. It was a series of questions, and then the final question was leading up to essentially giving me the answer, rather than kind of being able to expect me to know. So please don't think that Oxbridge interviews are essentially a test of knowledge. They're anything but that. They're actually a test of application of knowledge.
Exactly right, Rohan, thank you. So how do the interviews work? What are the criteria that they're looking for? So the first thing is, as Rohan said, this question of application, being concentrated, showing enthusiasm for following a problem, for really engaging with the material that you're presented with. And that engagement needs to be reasoned. It needs to be thoughtful. You need to be able to maintain a strong argument. And if it turns out your argument is going somewhere stupid, if Rohan had decided that the weight of the Earth was, I don't know, 5 kilos, having the intelligence to break free of that line of thinking and come up with something else and move on. That's particularly important. One of the ways that people can perform back poorly in interviews the most easily is to get stuck on a particular line of argument they've decided on that isn't going anywhere. And they think because they've started, they have to finish, and that isn't true at all. If you come up with something rubbish, you can stop, reset, and move on. And it's also all about that communication in the interview. You've got to be clear, you need to be articulate, all of these things. And that's more important than, we've had a few questions about the level of English. There are people, and I've met quite a few of them in interviews I've given, who can speak absolutely sparkling English, who nevertheless get unbelievably tongue-tied. And there are people who speak a lower level of English, who perhaps have it as a second language, who are far clearer and easier to understand. You want to be Chris Whitty rather than Boris Johnson in this situation, if that makes sense. So we mentioned briefly earlier the software situation with the interviews. Now we've been doing some research over the last few weeks into what works well on Zoom. I'm trying to do it for you all, and other online sort of communication platforms. So we have a few tips we wanted to share with you about doing the interview. The first is to make sure that you look into the camera, not the screen. It's very tricky because obviously if you look into the camera, you can't see your own face, and so it's hard to track your own reactions, but do try to practice looking into the camera so that you're looking at the person rather than at the keyboard when you're talking to them. We found in both our own experiences and the research I've done that it really helps to wear proper clothes. Some people even like to wear shoes so they can feel more serious and grounded in the situation. You want to take your time. There's going to be a little bit of a lag with the audio because of all of the technology involved in transmitting it rather than just the air. So it's even more important to be clear and articulate and take your time with what you're saying so that people can follow and understand you. You're also losing almost all of your body language cues. So if you're going to bring some in, you maybe want to make them a little bit bigger, push further into the screen, be a little bit more expressive, maybe get that, maybe less hands. It depends how much space you've got around the camera, really. But maybe overdo your gestures a little bit, just because you're so much smaller and you've got so much less to work with. And the other thing is to make sure that you're well lit. I've invested in a special lamp, which I'm using today to make sure that my face is lit and not the background. I wouldn't necessarily expect everyone to do that, but make sure that you've tested your setup, that the lighting works, that the sound works, that the whole thing is clear and usable, and you're not going to have any technical problems. It's quite possible that some of the people interviewing you will not be as comfortable with the software as they might be. And so it's definitely an advantage for you to be the one who looks relaxed and professional, and they're the one who's a little bit panicked. So that sort of walks you through the big set of tips we have that fit into the 20 minutes of the PowerPoint presentation. But obviously we have much more support we can offer than just that. Will, if you were able to talk us a little bit through the focused interview programs that we're offering at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, obviously at the moment, we've got roughly 4 weeks until the interviews start. A little bit less now, actually, if we're using the 7th of December as our starting point. Obviously, it might be that you don't have your interview to the 14th or something like that, so you might have a bit more time, depending on your subject. But it's really important to make the most of that time. No matter what you're doing to prepare, the sooner you start, the bigger a difference you can make. Now, obviously, we have a way that we support students. And yeah, as Matt said, we've got a focused program at the moment that we're running. This combines a few different elements. So mock interviews, is a really important part of the interview preparation. I'd be surprised if anyone these days goes into an Oxbridge interview without having done one mock interview. But yes, so we have our students do mock interviews, each with a new tutor, to make sure that they're not too comfortable with these tutors, and they're also learning from varied experiences. My interview at Oxford might have been quite different to someone else's interview at a different college, and actually it can be more helpful to get a broader sense as to what to expect. So yeah, do those mock interviews. Those are really important, but it's also really helpful to have that sort of a snapshot of your interview ability. And so our students, as well as doing those, will be having interview tutorials so that they've got a personal tutor who's got a more longitudinal sense of their progress and development. So your mock interviewer will give you loads of feedback and ideas on how to improve from that interview, but they won't really know, is this your third mock interview? Is this the result of lots of progress, or are you right at the start? Whereas your personal tutor is able to, guide you through the whole process, notice areas that you're struggling with, and, make sure that you're doing the right things to address them. If you find that you freeze up when there are questions about things that you don't know so much about, that is going to be a key part of the interview. And if that's something that you particularly struggle with, then your personal tutor will be able to say, we need to be working on that. We need to be doing exercises and tasks so that you're more comfortable with it. So mock interviews and tutorials. And we also run intensive weekend courses for the interviews. These are, sort of run in small groups. So it's an opportunity for students to learn collaboratively, learn from the experiences and mistakes of other students who are in the exact same situation as them. And sort of more than this, there is another opportunity for mock interviews. And during those mock interviews, students will be able to watch, learn from other students when they're doing their mock interviews, and also critique them. So we're hoping that by the end of it, our students make up a cohort of confident interviewers who are able to tackle new information, able to analyze things properly and objectively, able to reason, but also able to watch another interview and say, those things you did well, those things you didn't do well, because of course that is going to reflect on your own performance, provided some level of introspection on the student's part. So these are the main things. Obviously, students have the book. They also have access to our seminars, which are university level, subject specific seminars on a huge range of topics. As we were talking earlier, it's not a matter of you having a huge amount of knowledge of things. Obviously that's helpful, but that's not really what they're there for. We're not there to sort of load you up with facts. Those seminars are there to help you explore your subjects academically, almost like a test run for the interview. And also when they ask you, because they often will, they ask me, when they ask you, so scientists, they might say, what field, design an experiment for me in a field that you're interested in. And if you've been exploring a number of things, you're going to be much more equipped to answer those kind of questions. So yeah, we naturally make our students work quite hard, but obviously a place at Oxford or Cambridge is worth working pretty hard for. I think that's basically it. That's a pretty good tour of the support at the moment. Matt, you're muted.
I know, you'd think after a full year of practicing with this kit, we've got the hang of it. Evidently not.
Your subtitles kept going for you though, so that was pretty impressive, even though you were muted.
Well, that might be a solution for everyone then. No one has to listen, everyone just gets to read. I think many people will be happy with that. So yes, as Will mentioned, those are the features of the programs that we're currently offering. So that's for our focused medicine interview program, which has in the past had success rates of as high as 82% of the students we've worked with getting placed at medical school, compared with 12% in the national average, and 55% of them getting into Oxford or Cambridge as well, following in Rohan's impressive footsteps. We have a range of other programs. I've pulled out economics here as another one, another example, where you can see the rate of success we've had compared with some of the UK's top schools that we're very proud of. Obviously, they have a lot of other things to be dealing with, you know, rugby clubs, making lunches, teaching other subjects, looking after dormitories, but we're pleased that we're able to outperform them, even despite our small size, even if we are somewhat more focused. And our impact overall, as I know we've had a few questions about which courses we have available. Across all of the subjects we work with, around 63% of our students were lucky enough to receive offers for Oxbridge in the last cycle, and that compares with an average of 18%. If you browse through the website, you'll be able to see the specifics of the interview programs we're currently offering. But if the subject you're interested in isn't mentioned there, it may be because there are, I think between the two universities, something like 60 different bachelor's degrees you can apply for. And so we don't necessarily have a page on every single one of them, but we should be able to offer support on pretty much every single one of them. If you're trying to get an organ scholarship, unfortunately, we won't be able to find you an organ tutor. But that's pretty much the only thing we're falling down is what I'm hoping at the moment. And now I think of it, I do actually know an organist, so we might even be able to patch something together there. We've also been we've also had some pleasant mentions on Trustpilot. This is just a snapshot of them. Obviously, you can read them in full by searching UniAdmissions Trustpilot. They'll all pop up for you there. I think there may even be. Did you get a name check in there, Will? I know Mia did in one of these. Maybe you need to.
Oh, I hadn't seen.
Yeah, maybe you need to talk to her about that, because I think that's dreadfully unfair. If
she's stealing my thunder.
Yeah, getting her to be cited in the reviews. Need to catch up with that. Do any of them say anything nice about you, Rohan? None of them have mentioned me.
They usually mention the tutors, because obviously your personal tutor is the one that you spend the most time with. And particularly for students who we're supporting for like 6 months plus, you do get to know your tutor really well. So yeah, usually tutor. I can see Iman has obviously done very well for one student.
There's a couple of parents who've mentioned me, but I think I've took extra care of them because they booked with us right from the start. So they're probably a little bit sick and tired of hearing from me now.
And that's what we want ultimately. The real stars of the show are the tutors, their expertise, their skill, the support they're able to offer the students. You know, you'd much rather go to a restaurant where they told you about the food and the waiters. We're very much the waiters in this equation. But that brings us to the end of the structured part of the presentation. I've run out of slides now, and it's very difficult to it's very difficult to redo them live. Almost as difficult as doing live hand-drawn animation. So we're going to transition now into the Q&A part. I can see we've already had 27 questions pop up in the Q&A box. If you would like to drop them in there, that would be really helpful, and we will.
So I wanted to start with one question in particular, because it was just very interesting. Someone said that they've received an invitation to interview at Cambridge in person.
Oh. So I've just checked this on the website, because I also saw this question, and the Cambridge website at the moment still says, in order to minimise risks in the current round, we're making plans to interview applicants without requiring them to come to Cambridge. We will release further details about the alternative arrangements as soon as we can. Well, that is a start of the further details, which is some people are being invited to Cambridge. That's interesting and unexpected. Thank you for letting us know. I expect if you are unable to travel because of the famous virus, then they'll be able to sort you out for an online interview. But given the choice, I think we would all recommend going in person. It's quite a nice day out, and I think it'll probably be a better, more rewarding experience all around to be interviewed in person than to do it from your spare bedroom. I'm sure you'd agree, Rohan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just much easier to build rapport in person as well. we're going to carry on with taking some of these questions, but obviously some of them are fairly specific and detailed, and will require a little bit of research on our part. So please don't feel like we're ignoring some questions. It's just it may not be the best use of our time to be going through them, and we probably normally need at least answers to 12 or 13 questions. So sometimes students ask things like, which college should I apply to, or how should I improve my medical application? Normally it takes us 20 minutes to kind of go through that. So the best thing is please do book a consultation with us if you kind of would like to speak to us in a bit more detail. Matt, could you do the honors and show them how to do that? And while Will carries on with the questions.
Yes, Will, if you want to kick us off with whichever question you fancy.
Sure, I'll find a good one. We've got so someone who's 17 at the moment, applying to medical school, presumably year 12. What is the most important piece of advice you can give me? Now, obviously, lots of students that come my way ask me those kind of things, and that can end up being a 20-30 minute conversation. The main thing I would say is start earlier than you think. Lots of students don't give themselves the right amount of time to prepare for, especially for medicine. There's additional hoops you have to jump through. So giving yourself the right amount of time to address everything properly is really important. I'll let Matt, because he's found the book. Oh yeah, if you just watch what Matt is doing while listening to me saying other stuff, that hopefully not too confusing. But yes, so it may be, it may be that you start your preparation early and you actually find that you're taking to things really well, and it doesn't need as much attention as you thought. But it may also be the opposite. It may be that you're taking to things less well and that it needs a lot more work than you thought. And if you give yourself time, both options are fine. Either way, you're fine. If you don't give yourself time, you're opening yourself up to the risk of that second option and not enough time to make up for it. But yeah, so that's the one key thing. Someone's asked, is it too late to enroll in your interview support? Absolutely not. So we are currently taking on students. The process is me or one of my team would want to speak with you, find out a bit more about you and your application, find out if these programs are right for you. There are some students who I turn away, who I don't think are right for the kind of support, that aren't going to work as hard as I'd want them to make the difference, and I have to turn them away. But yeah, the first step would be to book a consultation, as Matt is demonstrating, would have a chat with you. And of course, if I think you're a good student and if I think the support will make a big difference, then we'll be able to get you started. Like I said, about 4 weeks. That's a lot of time if you use it sensibly.
Yeah, on that note, some parents sometimes call us and book consultation, just say, can I book one mock interview? And they get a little bit frustrated when we say, well, look, we need to speak to your son, we need to speak to your daughter, get a better understanding of where the requirements are. We only work with 30% of students actually, and end up, so every person that rings us, we only end up with offering to work with 1 in 3 of them. And that's because we want to make sure that students coming to us are actually motivated and keen. So please don't kind of feel bad that we're asking to speak to your child. We do need to assess them to make sure they have a credible chance, because we don't want to waste their time or your money at that matter. Yeah,
it's really important to me that when I'm taking on a student, I know that we can make a big difference. And they can be one of the 63% that are successful. So yeah, those are the kind of things that I'm looking for when I'm speaking with people. Is this concept of better grades making the influence on your admissions test score true for most courses then? So yes. So if you think about the pie chart which we showed earlier, now for Cambridge, that pie chart is basically the same all the way through the application, because you've got a really high chance of getting to interviews. So it doesn't really vary that much. You're really judged after the interview, where they have all that information and made that decision. For Oxford, the pie chart changes. And obviously, pre the interview, the pie chart is basically almost 50% the test, almost 50% your GCSEs, and then, you know, maybe 5-10% personal statement references. So obviously at that point, the GCSEs are more influential. And again, this is why we say if a student might have weaker GCSEs, we might say, actually, you might be better off at Cambridge, where they make a smaller impact on the decision because they don't shortlist so strictly. Now, once you're at interview, obviously the interview then comes in, takes up its 30% chunk, and the others become slightly less important. But you might not get to that stage if you're unfortunate. It is relevant for pretty much all courses. Certain courses place more emphasis on tests, some slightly less. STEM subjects, you know, maths, engineering, that 10% sliver for everything else will be even smaller. So yeah, you've got to bear in mind that this will vary a little bit, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb to be going off of, and particularly for students who have, well, for everyone really, if you've done very well at GCSEs, it's important to realize that actually the bulk of the decision making is still yet to come. And if you've done less well, then again, the bulk of the decision making is still to come. So you can make a difference. You know, you don't necessarily have to be held back just because you drop one grade, but there are certain things, like Rohan said, that you can do, that we can help you with. Okay.
Fab. I wanted to address the first question we got from Anna Andrieu, who asks, will those who are not able to sit the BMAT due to technical difficulties still be considered by universities? So my understanding is that there was a lot of problems with the BMAT this year, and that any test centres that haven't been able to administer the exam properly, or where the computers crashed, or the questions didn't load properly, and we've heard quite a few horror stories about this already. All of that information has been sent by the test centres to Cambridge Assessment and will be incorporated into the admissions decisions. So it's worth checking with your test centre, which is probably your school, that the information has been passed on that you weren't able to sit the test because of the problems. But if that's all been done properly, then you should be fine. Our expectation is that because the test went wrong for so many people, the test just isn't going to be as big a part of the process this year as it would normally be, because the information it provides just isn't very good quality. But Rohan probably has some further detail that I have there.
So everything you've said is spot on. The number of percentage of students affected is more than a minority, is actually the great majority. So as a result, obviously the tests will be looked at less significantly. My major piece of advice to you, whether you work with us or kind of continue on your own, is please let your universities know. So I actually had lunch with one of the admissions tutors about a week ago, and the main thing was that they weren't aware of how significant the issues were. So perhaps Cambridge Assessment hasn't quite formalised this process, but please do let your university tutors know. So, and if you don't know who they are, there's an entire webpage on each university's website with direct links to. So please do email them, letting them know what exactly the issues were, in addition to informing your school. That's really important, and please do that for every single BMAT university or TSA university that you've applied to.
It was interesting. So this is something that I don't think I've told you guys yet, but so there was someone that I was speaking to from Turkey, I think it was sitting for the ECAA, and was due to sit at the start of November, but lockdown came in and wasn't able to sit it. So we're sort of not sure what was going on. About 7 days later, was told they would be sitting it the following morning. So got basically a 1 day notice to say the test's back on, you're doing it. So that's sort of an example of sometimes these things can be quite unpredictable. And we use all the information we can and get more information than that to try and make sure that our students know exactly what they're doing and doing all the right things at the right time. But Cambridge and Oxford can sometimes throw curveballs. And I think particularly for the students who not just had some difficulty, but weren't even sent a link, so didn't even sit the BMAT, we're still not sure if there's going to be another test, or how that's going to be sort of handled.
Yeah, what we do
the
know
official position is that there's not. So Cambridge Assessment has said categorically there's no test planned for this year, but obviously that may change. Will, just so there's a few questions, and actually just on this notice, the topic of kind of late notices. Lots of parents come to us and actually say, "Well, I'll get back in touch with you once I've heard back and I've got an interview."
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
So it's a concern that I completely empathise with. You know, you don't know if you have an interview yet. You haven't been told anything. Cambridge has been quiet, or Oxford has been quiet. But Cambridge and Oxford will be quiet for a lot longer than you realise. This person who's had an invitation from Cambridge for an in-person interview, that's a lot earlier than I would have anticipated. Generally, we see about 5 to 10 days notice. But what you don't want to happen is you wait around and you wait for that invitation, and you get it with just 5 days time to sort of start arranging mock interviews and start preparing. Luckily this student from Turkey had been preparing for the ECAA already for the original test. So when they got the last minute notification, they'd already done the prep, so didn't have to rush about to do it. But imagine if it was the interview instead. There wouldn't have been any time to make any real difference. Now you won't get 1 day's notice, but you'll get less than you'd like. If you have some serious, if you say, I went into the PAT and I didn't answer any questions, then it's pretty safe to say you won't get asked to interview. Or I answered one question and that was it. But if you've done well in your test, if you practiced right, if you prepared properly, and you sat the test and it went well, and you've got a strong profile, you should believe in the strength of your application. And, I usually say, start preparing. Again, whether it's with us or on your own or with your school, do something. I've been telling students, get your school to start arranging you mock interviews. Ask your teachers to, if they could possibly stay after school for half an hour one day to do a mock interview with you. Because the sooner you can start preparing, the more ready you will be when you need it.
Yeah, unlike the tests, which you can, I won't say cram, but you can prepare for intensely, it just doesn't work with interview preparation because it takes a long time to develop these skills. So it's not something you can kind of do in a few days. It does take weeks rather than kind of hours.
Rohan's exactly right. You can't learn to be a talented actor or a charming personality in the space of a week, unfortunately. Like you might be able to learn algebra or to learn a poem by heart. We've got a few questions about the contextualization of GCSE scores and admission scores. So I'm going to run through a few of these now. So we've had a question about doing badly in the admissions test. So if the rest of your application is strong, there's a good chance you'll still be invited to interview. The admissions test is just one part of the process. And it's not unusual for people in the bottom quarter, the bottom third, sometimes even the bottom 15 or 20% of the admissions test distribution invited for interviews, and they do sometimes get in. Obviously doing better in the admissions test is better than doing worse in the admissions test. But once you're in the interview, it's something that you can definitely overcome and still get an offer. We've had a question about centre assessed GCSE grades. So Oxford and Cambridge, both of them, Oxford in particular, were right at the front of the pressure for the centre assessed grades to be put in place. I've spoken to a number of people at Oxford who were very passionate about the centre assessed grades and were very angry about the algorithm. Oxford really like Cambridge as well. They really like the centre assessed grades. They've been supportive of the idea from the beginning. They will not be devalued when it comes to making your application. As far as they're concerned, they're just as good as real A levels, and they've made that very clear over the last few weeks. That's not anything to worry about. Similarly, we've had one question. Would Cambridge take into account the fact that I didn't get top GCSE grades when I did them because I was still learning English? Again, Cambridge in particular will look at your whole application in context. And so if you've got a compelling piece of information there, such as you started learning English aged 14, you're now aged 17, and you've gone from not speaking English to applying to Cambridge, that's a really strong indication for your application, much more interesting than another student who has got great GCSE grades. So I wouldn't think that's a worry. If you've got other positive indicators in your application, then things like that, that'll all be looked at in context, and they'll assess you in a smart way there. We had a question whether we provide tutors for students who are applying from schools that do IB, not GCSE. Absolutely. The process is the same regardless of whether you're coming from Canada or Kuwait in terms of the interview, and so we're able to support you regardless of what exam system you've come through. It can often be even more valuable for students coming from IB and EB and Abitur and Baccalaureate contexts, as the set of skills may be a little bit more foreign to them. But you have a lot more experience with the international applicants than I do, Will, if you want to expand there.
What? Sorry, say again. I was reading a question.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Just to say that we've had some real success with international applicants over the last few years, and
right. Yeah. So obviously, and there are some questions about sort of good timing about how much international, what is looked at if you're an international with different qualifications. Generally speaking, Oxford and Cambridge, again, there's an overarching principle, which is Oxford and Cambridge want the best students at their universities. Okay. Now, if you're a fantastically talented young student, but you've just sat exams in Canada, or you've sat them in Hong Kong, or whatever it is, and it's your local exams, most of them, the vast majority of them, are recognised by, well, maybe not the vast majority, but the vast majority of students that I'm speaking to who have these local exam boards, they're national exam boards, they are recognised by Oxford or Cambridge. Both universities have pages on their website where it lists out every single country, and you can see what grade you need in your equivalent tests. There will be some countries which aren't accepted, and then you're better off sitting A-levels or IB. But generally speaking, like I say, if you are a strong applicant, just because you've sat the APs rather than the A-levels, doesn't mean that you're going to be poorly affected. Okay.
Fab. Thanks, Will. We've had a question about being interviewed in person in foreign countries, for example, in China or Singapore, being disadvantaged relative to the UK. Again, no, we don't think this will be a problem. We think if you have the opportunity to be interviewed in person, it is a small advantage compared to doing it online. But ultimately, they're going to be putting in place fairly serious measures, I'm sure, to make sure that no one is disadvantaged, whatever format of interview they end up going for. Where let's have a look at some others. Again, we talked about the BMAT earlier, but we understand that there have been problems with a whole range of admissions tests. Our expectation is if the test didn't go well, if things malfunctioned, if the information they've been able to therefore get on the people who've sat the test isn't very good quality, because some of them only got 40 minutes or some of them only got half the questions, I think they'll just take the tests less seriously. The tests are only useful because they allow you to compare the students, and if the students didn't do the same test, then you can't make meaningful comparisons.
So Matthew had a few questions.
Matthew Dye, I know him well.
Yes. So your Matthew, your question about will interviewers stop you sort of mid train of thought is quite a good one. Now, generally speaking, if you get something wrong or it's not quite the answer that they're looking for, they're not going to sort of say, no, you've got it wrong, end of interview. You clearly aren't the kind of student that we're looking for. All the questions that they ask are not, it's not question, answer, new question, answer, new question, answer. They'll often want to discuss a concept or an idea or a theory for a while. It's a bit different for some of the engineers who will have sort of a set of specific problems to solve that they can solve with them. But often, if perhaps you are veering off the kind of track that they would expect for that kind of question, what they will do is in their response, they will often give you more information to try and help you figure things out. So to take the example from my own experience for psychology, if they're asking for you to interpret the results of a study and sort of work out what the underlying cause of a set of data is, and you're sort of you're getting there, but you're not quite, you're sort of suggesting viable options, but it's not quite what they're looking for, what they'll do is they'll tell you more information. So they might say, okay, what if I told you that they ran an additional study where they controlled these two variables? What would you then, what then might be the conclusion? They're not trying to trip you up. They're not trying to trick you. They're trying to see how you problem solve and how you're able to think critically. Now, if you stay on your course and they give you more information and you don't listen to it and you sort of disregard it and just carry on with the line of thinking that you're going down, that is a bad thing to be doing. Okay, you need to be dynamic to the sort of additions that they give you. You know, they're not trying to test how firm you believe in what you're saying. They're trying to test how well you can interpret information. I think you also had a question about spacing out preparation and what you should be doing. And again, this is relevant to everyone, really. At this stage, I would say try and do something to do with your subject every day. Whether that's going back through some of your A-level topics that you haven't touched on for a while, or that's reading a new article about something that you've not really heard about before. It's really helpful to keep sort of your academic juices going. You don't want to sort of stagnate for a couple of weeks and not spend too much time thinking about it. You want to try and keep yourself fresh and updated. In terms of specific interview, you know, doing a mock interview, again, these want to be spaced out. So earlier I was saying that we have mock interviews and tutorials. You don't want to do 4 mock interviews over 4 days just straight in a row. Ideally, you want to space them out so you can take on the feedback and you know, initiate improvements. If they've said that, you know, whatever it is, if your mock interviewer critiques something, you want to give yourself time to work on it, either on your own or with your tutor before the next one. So like I said, at the moment, the kind of support that we're typically doing, it's a tutorial and a mock each week for the next 4 weeks. And that's quite nicely spread out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for the detail. We've had a few questions about Cambridge Medicine and Cambridge Medicine interviews. So I'm just going to sort of pile these up for you, Rohan.
Yep.
Okay. So the first question is, I'm applying for medicine, but I don't do biology. Will they ask me biology-based questions? That's one, but I'm gonna give you 3 or 4. So if I do physics A-level, will I be asked physics questions in my science-based interview? Would I be asked biology questions if I did not take biology? I suspect these have come in from the same person. We've also had a question as to why Cambridge interviews so many more people than Oxford, and about the 5th choice. Hopefully you can hold all of those together in your head at once. Go ahead. Tell us about.
Challenge accepted.
Tell us about the subject. Tell us about what they might ask you in the interview, and then explain the 5th choice to us. And I can talk about the interview numbers as well.
Challenge accepted. Okay. Biology. You don't need biology to study medicine in Cambridge. It helps, but it's not essential. If you've not done biology at A-level, you won't be asked questions at A-level, but however, GCSE level biology is very fair game. Remember that you'll need to have a basic understanding of biology to take the BMAT anyway. So anything at GCSE level, you may get asked any questions on physics. So to go back to my example, I got asked, how would you weigh the Earth? And that required me to equate, use a little bit of Newtonian mechanics and centripetal forces. Using the moon. That's not something that's covered in biology and chemistry. That was pure A2 physics that was required. So yes, that's very fair game. To follow on from that, if you're not studying physics at A2, it's unlikely you'll have a physics question come up in that level of detail. In terms of the 5th option, that's something I normally recommend leaving blank. Normally because the deadline is the 15th of January for it. So actually, what I suggest is actually there's no point putting a 5th option in. So if you get 3 or 4 offers before the end of the year, it's actually academic. If you go rejected from 3 places, then actually you may want to put a slightly more conservative university or course. Than, you know, for instance, instead of applying for biomedical sciences at Imperial, you may choose to go to a slightly lesser competitive university instead. In terms of why Cambridge interviews so many more students than Oxford, I'm going to hand over to Matt for this one.
Oh yes, it's the straightforward reason is that Cambridge have more places, and so they interview more people for more places is one reason. It's also just a choice that Cambridge have made over the years. They like to interview more people, and and that goes for almost every subject at Cambridge. They interview, I believe, almost everyone for medicine now. And that's, you know, simply a choice I expect, that they track this in terms of exam performance and BMAT and all those sorts of things in the background. I'm sure they have good reasons for doing it, as you've suggested, but they haven't told us exactly what the subtleties of it are. But it is one of the nice things about it, that you're very likely to get an interview for Cambridge medicine.
Well, we've got a lot of questions on the pricing and the financing of the interview programs.
Yeah, so if a student comes to me now and says, you know, well, what is the cost of the support? It depends on a lot of things. We're getting lots of students coming to us who are in year 13 and are this year, lots coming to us in year 12, year 11, some in year 10 as well. And naturally, you know, my job is to make sure that whatever time you come to us, we're designing and arranging a program that gives you the best support, gives you the best chances, works for you as well, because that's really important. It needs to be something you're comfortable with and happy with. And basically, yeah, makes the most of the time available. So it will vary a lot depending on the kind of things that you tell me. And that's why we always encourage people to book consultations. We always encourage people to speak with us. There is a chance that I would say, I'm afraid there isn't a program for you. But equally, I would want to make sure that whatever support you are doing, that it is specific to you and it is most well matched to you. So I'd have to ask, most questions about admissions are sadly not simple yes or no answers. Lots of people come to us looking for yes or no answers, and it does take longer, but if I give you yes or no answers, they're not going to be the best things for you. You know, there's always going to be a number of factors that the answer depends on, and I'd much rather you have the most accurate answer rather than the easiest answer.
Well, what about students from perhaps access backgrounds who perhaps don't have the financial means to apply for our programs?
Yeah, okay, good question. So what we do is, you know, we try to support as many students as possible from a variety of backgrounds. For students that are from, you know, families that are struggling financially, we have something called our foundation. What this is every year we support a number of students completely for free. I believe we have spaces for 100 students per year. And I think at the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, Rohan, I think we're around 60 who have applied and been accepted.
No, we're actually about 85.
85, okay, wow. So in which case, there's about 15 places left for students who need the support and who, you know, deserve it. There is a bit of a sort of an official application process that does take a bit of time. So if you're listening to this and thinking that you might be a student who qualifies for this, please get in touch as soon as possible. Because if it does take us, you know, let's say a week, well, it would take you a bit of time to make the application, but if it takes us about a week to approve it, you don't want to be making that application a week before your interview. Okay. Sorry, yeah, Rohan.
I was just saying, there's a really good question about, is there a trial period with the program as well?
Yes, so this depends on the length of your program. But yeah, there's a trial period for all of our students, typically curtailed by a certain number of days and also a certain number of tutorials. So if you have your first tutorial and you think, actually, you know, this isn't quite working for me, I think I'd rather just do things on my own, the tutor isn't as helpful as I've been hoping, then you can withdraw from the program. We refund you completely. If it's something that we can fix, if you say, you know, the tutor was really smart, really clever, but we just didn't gel very well, then we will do everything to fix that. You know, reselect the tutor, make sure that it's someone who is able to work well with you. But if it's something that you can't fix and you're within that trial period, you can pull out We don't want students in programs that aren't working for them. That's crucial.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to say is, on the flip side, it's a trial period also for us to make sure that we can ensure that the student is a good fit for us. If they're not turning up to sessions, they're not doing their homework, then actually we'd have a frank conversation with the parents, say, look, I don't think perhaps it's a good fit, and we'd refund you your money as a result of that as well. So it has to work both ways.
Fab. Thank you for that, both. I want to pick up a few questions we've had, I expect from one person, all of them about engineering. Obviously, we have support available for engineering. That's something we'll be able to speak to you. And modern languages, as I said earlier, we can do pretty much every subject with the possible exception of the organ scholarship, although I would enjoy trying to figure that one out.
I think that's something we can definitely implement for next year, Matt.
Yeah, well, I
use your contact.
I do know an organist from church who I would normally be seeing tomorrow, but church is closed. So yeah, the first question we've had here is about the number of A stars at GCSE. The questioner has 6 rather than the average 8. Now, the thing to remember about 8 isn't average. So roughly half of people will have more than 8, roughly half of people will have fewer than 8. My guess, without looking at the distribution, assuming that it follows a roughly normal distribution, would be that something like 20 to 40% of people would have 7 A stars, maybe another 15 would have 6, and that's of people who get in, not even of people who apply. So I wouldn't worry too much about having slightly fewer A stars at GCSE. And in this instance, where you have what sounds like an unbelievably painful medical problem with a slipped disc while you were doing the exam, that you were able to do the exam at all, I'm impressed by. That sounds horrid. My flatmate got a slip disc for a few years ago and walked around bent over for 2 weeks. I think that's an excellent excuse. I'm sure that will be taken into account. I wouldn't worry at all. That you did that well is pretty impressive.
It's also worth bearing in mind as well, like we've said, you know, even if they didn't take into account your extenuating circumstances, which I imagine they will, being slightly below the average in your GCSEs is well within the realms of possibility to be above average for the other things that you're being marked on. Lots of students that I speak to, or a number of students that I speak to, will be told by school that they've not got high enough GCSEs to apply for Oxford and Cambridge. But I would still accept them because I'm confident in, you know, the way that we can support our students. And I know that, you know, even if they're slightly below average or a fair bit below average, if they absolutely smash it in the test, they're going to get an interview. If they absolutely smash it at the interview, they're going to get an offer. What matters to me more is, you know, is the student going to work hard for this? Because yeah, as we've said, grades is 30%, 70% is a much bigger chunk. So if you're going to work as hard as possible for that 70%, you've probably got a better chance than someone who's secured the 30 but isn't going to work for the 70. Someone's asked if they can watch a sample seminar. We'd like to see what it's like. We've got a recording on all of our program pages. There's a clip from a seminar for that specific subject. So please do go ahead, have a watch. I think we also usually do a brief clip from a tutorial as well. So by all means, watch away to get a sense for how things work.
There's another one here on what's special about your interview support compared to other places? Why should I use your support over others? Well, we get 2/3 of our students in, can't really get better than that. But Will, is there anything else you'd kind of add to that?
I think it depends on you and it depends on the student. If you just want to do a couple mock interviews, if that's all the work that you want to put into this, then you're probably better off somewhere else. Because as we've said before, we're going to take this really seriously. We're only interested in doing well. So, you know, there are other places that run interview courses. There are other people that do this. I don't think anyone as reliably as us, but it may be that there's someone out there which is a better fit for you if, like I say, you only want to do an hour of tutoring, something along those lines. Okay.
Fab. Thank you both. We had a batch of questions about law, which I'm going to quickly run through. Which topics should you know about, have a great knowledge of for Cambridge law? So it's very unusual for successful applicants to have done the law A-level or the law GCSE. The assumption is that you will come in with no prior legal knowledge. So the interview and the application as a whole is much more to do with rigorous logical thinking and sincere engagement with ethical and moral questions. So that's the sort of thing I would be looking at, spending a little bit more time maybe on philosophy, maybe reading The Economist, things like that, to make sure that you're really, you really know how to develop good quality arguments. And the same goes for the LNAT, which there's also been a question about. I haven't done the correlation regression for the LNAT yet. It's on my list of things to do, so I don't have a precise mathematical answer to how much emphasis Oxford puts on the LNAT exam. Now, I do know that Oxford interview, let me check because I've got the spreadsheet open in front of me. Oxford interview around 40% of applicants for law, and so I would expect that for the most part those are applicants who've scored in the top half, maybe even in the top third on the LNAT. But again, I haven't checked. The thing to remember is obviously you've got the personal statement as well, you've got your GCSE grades, you've got all of those contextual factors. But the LNAT exam is the one thing that all of the students will have done and they'll be able to do a direct comparison with. Speaking of admissions tests, we have had a couple of questions on that. It's a good idea to contact your college if the BMAT went wrong for you, but if you filled out the special consideration form, then that should be fine. Our understanding is that it went wrong for, if not the majority of students, pretty close to it, and so that I don't think that's anything to worry about. It's not, you are not in a minority of people. That's happened to a lot of people. We've had a question about the IB, not able to do the BMAT and chance of getting an interview. A predicted grade of 44 is, by my recollection, very close to the most you can get in the IB. And so I would imagine you've got a good chance of getting an interview there, depending on the course. They will take into account the grades that are at the JCSE sort of equivalent, but it's not as hard and fast a formula as it would be for UK applicants. But again, you can find detailed information on the university websites about that.
We've had a couple of questions. A couple of students are in year 12. A couple of people asking when the best time to start is, and what they should be doing. Like I said, we get students that come to us at all different times, and generally speaking, I advise them to make the most of that time. A student who comes to me in year 12 could, if they wanted to, leave and then come back 6 months later and start preparing. But then you've lost that advantage that you have over the other students who haven't been thinking ahead. And, generally speaking, if you're thinking about this, if you've got spare time, then there are things you could be doing. Love to have a chat with any of you about what would be a sensible thing to be doing at this point.
Will, is there a point that's almost too early for applicants to start thinking about this?
So if you were in year 9, so if you hadn't started GCSE, I'd probably say we're too early to even make a start on things. In your GCSE years, I never recommend doing a BMAT paper once a week from the start of GCSE. That's a pretty surefire way to make sure you never want to do them when it comes to the actual thing. But for our younger students, for our GCSE students, we generally have a less intensive syllabus, all about helping them develop themselves into being the kind of applicant that Oxbridge are looking for. So there's less attention on the specific parts of the application, more attention on the soft skills that they use those parts of the application to test. And if we can build those up early, it's so easy to apply them to the test, to the interview, to the personal statement later on. But yeah, before GCSE, I think it's probably, if you're very hardworking, you want to do it, please do. But I think we wouldn't really have much to do to support you at that point.
Yes, if you want to think of it perhaps in a contrasting way, having read our BMAT book, I now reckon I would be pretty good at the BMAT. But unfortunately, because I'm 31, it wouldn't be useful for them to test me on a test for 17-year-olds. Similarly, if you're 11, a test for 17-year-olds isn't going to be very helpful either. I think that's the way to think of it. All of these resources are targeted at the right age group, and so they don't work when you're too old and they don't work when you're too young either, within some sensible barriers. We had a question about the knowledge of PPE, politics, philosophy and economics, if you haven't studied any of these subjects. If you haven't studied the subjects, then obviously they're not going to expect you to be able to draw a perfect Phillips curve or expound the theodicical argument. But you need to show an interest, to have engaged sincerely. It's very similar to the process for law, really. If you haven't got the knowledge, then you've got to make sure that you're showing the skills. That's really where you need to be for PPE.
I mean, to give you a real world example. Sorry, Matt. You carry on and I'll...
People do also really underestimate the maths. It's very easy to think that you can get into PPE while not being particularly good at maths, and that's a mistake to watch out for. The maths component on the TSA is the one that shows the strongest correlation with whether you get an interview or not, whereas the essay, pretty much everyone is good at the essay. So if you want to stand out, I would say the maths is more important there.
It is worth saying, particularly for something like PPE, current affairs is one of the key things to be up to date with. I've read feedback reports from Oxford colleges where a student has done fantastically in the philosophy section, fantastically in the politics section, and then the economics tutor asked them their thoughts on the most recent budget, and they just didn't know what it was. They didn't know anything about it. And that, that might not be enough to scupper the most fantastic applicant, but certainly that was something which seemed to be the main reason why they weren't accepted. If you are signing up to do PPE, you should be showing that you are interested in it, and having a basic understanding of probably one of the most important things to do with UK economics not each year, but whenever it's done. That's a starting point.
Yeah, and just on that note, sometimes students take it to the other extreme. So sometimes I get some very keen students contacting me saying, which textbooks would you recommend for anatomy, physiology and biochemistry for medicine at Cambridge? You are not expected to have first year undergraduate level of knowledge when you're applying and being interviewed. It's very much, as we've said, it's a test of your application, it's a test of your enthusiasm, it's a test of your coachability. So to give you one of my own examples, when I was interviewed, I was asked to draw a graph of the cardiac cycle, basic A-level biology. And some students got it extremely quickly because their schools had kind of got warning from because the admissions tutor asked this question every year. Now, I didn't know, I'd never even seen this graph before, so it took me a good 20 minutes to get it, whereas some of the other students, they got it in 5 minutes. The reason I got it and some of them didn't, there were obviously other aspects to it. One of the main things is I was able to show my logical thinking and processes, why I was making certain comments and arguments. So lots of students think that actually it's a test of knowledge, so it's the destination, actually it's the journey, and that's the biggest tip I can give to anyone. So if you take away nothing from today, just remember, talk through your arguments, talk through your rationale, lead the interviewer on a journey rather than just kind of showing them I've arrived at my destination.
Thank you, Rohan. We've had a couple of questions about when offers come out, which I'm going to try and address. So one asks, do applicants get their results on the 25th of January or do some get them earlier? My recollection is that last year that was roughly when they came back from Oxford, based on the students I spoke to. But obviously there is some variation also with the pool process. But generally speaking, it is after Christmas. It did used to be before Christmas, which ruined my Christmas when I didn't get into Oxford, but that was 2007. It was a long old time ago. They've updated things since. But that is roughly when it'll be. Obviously, they're not going to send them out until they've finished, so we can't predict a date quite yet. But being kept waiting isn't necessarily a bad thing. We've also been asked, is it true that universities such as Warwick might introduce an entrance exam? Is that why many have not received an offer yet? Now it is tomorrow, 1 month since you were first able to send in your UCAS application. a lot of universities won't be sending out offers yet because they need to plan their places. If, as is quite possible, they haven't had as many applications in the 15th of October deadline as they expected, and so they're expecting a glut of them ahead of the January deadline, they'll be putting out fewer offers, maybe even no offers yet, as they figure out what to do. Because what you don't want to do if you're Warwick is to hand out 90% of your offers before Christmas, only to discover that was actually only half your applicants, and you haven't got enough spaces left for those applicants. So there's a fairly complicated bit of demand management that goes on to plan when offers go out and to who and for what subjects. And basically, it's all rather complicated. I wouldn't read anything into it. I think it's unlikely that universities are going to start introducing their own entrance exams. They're a nuisance to administrate. And as we've seen with the BMAT and the Oxford and Cambridge tests, even if you do them every year, they can still go quite seriously wrong. So I think it's unlikely that any universities are going to improvise them into being this year. The universities are much less worried about predicted grades and centre assessed grades than students and parents are. They trust teachers. They're not worried about it. I wouldn't expect anyone to put in any radical changes just because of these. We've got one of your favourite questions here, Rohan. Is taking 3 A levels and an AS and instead of 4 A levels a disadvantage? Because this is one of your absolute favourites to answer.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that with and celebrating.
Hungry eyes.
So Oxbridge are very clear that they will use the best 3 A levels when it comes to your offer. The only time when having a 4th A level is an advantage is if you're applying for some particularly demanding course, which requires a very specific set of A levels to be taken. The examples are things like natural sciences at Cambridge, where actually having that 4th A level in physics or chemistry, whatever the 4th science you take, is actually advantageous. Pretty much every other university and course, it's much better to have 3 A stars than to have 2 A stars and 2 A's. So if there's any risk at all that you may not end up with 3 A stars, I would recommend taking just 3.
Fab. Thank you, Rohan. We've had a couple of questions about the virus again. Matthew Dye tells us that he's been sent out a form asking what problems they've had in 2020 and how these will be taken into account. We don't know exactly how they'll be taken into account, but clearly they are going to be taken into account. That's why you've been given the form. Cambridge in particular are very thorough about making sure they have good contextual information about their students.
Yeah.
And the virus is a whole lot of context. I'm sure all of that will be taken into account in an intelligent and sensitive way. That they've asked you tells you that they care. What other questions? We've got a couple of questions about the freestanding mathematics qualification. I don't know very much about the freestanding mathematics qualification. If you get back in touch with us over email or through a consultation, I will look into it for you, but that's going to take me some research, and so I can't find out now while I also have to talk.
We've got a question from Jane Will about when is the best time to start on the program?
Yes, so generally speaking, obviously I've said this a couple of times, the longer you give yourself, the better. We've got a comprehensive program which we designed for Year 12 students to basically make sure that they're doing everything they need to do to be as competitive as they can be. That program is best used when started between 10 and 15 months before your interview. Okay, to give you some sense of things, we're about 13 months from your interview if you're a Year 12 student. So for that program in particular, if it's around that time, that's really the best time to be starting it. If you're that age, sorry. Obviously, students will start it later than that, but of course they'll need to be ready to be spending more time per week on it. And students may even start it earlier than that, but then they'll, the support will be much more spaced out. With the 10 to 15 months, you're sort of looking at a couple of hours a week dedicated to Oxbridge, which for most hardworking students is manageable. Lots of students tell me they're too busy. I tell them that if they weren't busy, that would be a clear indication that they might not be a strong candidate. Oxbridge candidates don't normally spend too much time twiddling their thumbs. And if you are twiddling your thumbs, this might be something to help occupy you and make sure you're spending your time well.
What's included in the revision resources component for the interview program?
So interviews, we've got the book, as well as, I said that you'd be able to come to the remaining seminars. We also keep these, we record these and keep these available for our students. So you'd be able to go through an archive of dozens of hours of university level seminars. These are all accompanied with suggestions for pre-reading and further reading. We also have a reading list specific to every subject. So you get quite a lot of stuff to be getting on with, which will keep you pretty busy. Obviously, the textbook itself is more specific to interviews and interview techniques and previous interviews questions. The rest of the materials are more about helping you develop yourself as an academic, as a student. I don't think I've missed anything, have I, Rohan?
Oh, no. The other thing to mention is the seminars are actually a key thing that distinguishes us from pretty much anyone else. There's an extreme amount of work for us to undertake, but they are really effective. And the main advantage is, of course, you are going into your interviews with essentially a serious amount of information that other students won't have access to. And these are actually born out of, so when I applied, I don't know if I told you guys this, when I applied in my King's Medicine interview, I was asked how statins work, and embarrassingly, I could only say about 30 seconds of information. And I knew that question would come up because I talked about it in my personal statement. Not very much, but enough for it to come up. And so naturally it came up in my Cambridge interview. They asked me what I'd read, and I looked him straight in the eye, and he said, well, how do statins work? So I looked him straight in the eye and I said, well, statins inhibit 3-hydroxy-3-methyl-glutaralkyl coenzyme A reductase inhibitors. And then took a big breath. And I could see him kind of just ticking lots of boxes. And I knew that at that point I'd kind of made some serious headway in getting my offer. So, don't underestimate the value of knowing things that other students don't.
Well, there you go. I didn't know that. My father absolutely loves statins, so I'll be pleased to know how they work. We've had a few questions about what the interviews will be like. We don't know in exact detail how the online format will work. I'm preparing a presentation at the moment on what we think the online interview will be and what the best practices for that are. So that's something you'll be able to join in with if you come to work with us. But our expectation is it will be very much like the classic old-fashioned usual interview format, except with the intervention of a computer in the middle. And there's a few other questions about interview types. Let's see. Oh, and most important, we've had a question about the training we provide for our tutors. We do train them. It's important to us that we put the effort in to develop their skills. That's something that we spend time on, and that ranges from the mandatory safeguarding training to making sure they have access to all of our resources and any other training opportunities that come up. It's something we're quite keen on. Rohan is so keen on learning that I've nearly finished doing my MBA this year, which he has foisted upon me. I think I've got about 3 weeks to go, which isn't something I would have the opportunity to do in most other companies, and that's sort of emblematic of the education company inside and out. A question like EPQ essays. They're good. Excellent idea to have done an EPQ. It's unlikely that it's going to be assessed separately and get you extra points per se, but it's a really good opportunity to demonstrate your level of engagement with the subject, and really helpful for your personal statement and interview. So anything like that is always worth doing. I did an EPQ myself, enjoyed it immensely, and it didn't come up in my interview at all. But nevertheless, it was doubtless worth the trouble because I can still remember most of the things I learned from it. We've had
I was just going to say, for those yet to do an EPQ and who are wondering whether or not they should, it's worth bearing in mind the work that goes into an EPQ. Like Matt says, if you have it, if it's good, if it's relevant, then they will look at it and that will be good. And it's a really good way to demonstrate your subject interest, which is something that they're keen on. But if you spend your whole year doing your EPQ, and that means that your A-levels, you spend less time on your A-levels, you can't spend as much time on your tests, these various things, then the benefit of the EPQ might be outweighed by the drawbacks. And very often with year 12 students, it's a matter of having or year 11 students, it's a matter of having a frank discussion about their workload and how much they can take on before they start to be overloaded. And you have to be very realistic with yourself about something like that as well. That's quite a difficult conversation to have sometimes.
Okay, so it's coming up to an hour and a half, so I think we'll start wrapping up. So if you do have any last minute burning questions, please do get them in the next couple of minutes.
Theodore Awani asks, what happens if a student doesn't get on well with the tutor? Can we request a change of tutor? This happens very occasionally, but it's something I believe we've been able to facilitate where there hasn't been a good rapport between student and tutor.
Yep, like you say, it doesn't happen very often, but if it does, we've got all the systems in place to make sure that you can get started with a tutor more suited to you.
Yeah. We've had a lot of questions specifically about the NatSci and economics interviews. Again, these are really good questions to come and ask us in through the consultation, as we can give you a much fuller, more detailed answer. And we'll be able to share resources and offer all of those sorts of things to you there. Amita asks about the disadvantages and advantages of students applying from fee-paying schools. Now it's interesting, whenever I go and talk to fee-paying schools, they go, oh, it's much too hard for us, we never get in. And whenever I go and speak to state schools, they say exactly the same thing. So teachers on both sides of the divide are worried. Our experience, and from the statistical information we have at hand, is that it doesn't make an enormous difference. If you are the best applicant for the place, you'll get in regardless of which school you've applied to. It isn't worth trying to do some kind of clever strategizing about that sort of thing. Obviously, the universities take seriously the need to admit students from a diversity of backgrounds and all that sort of thing. But there isn't a conspiracy at work to keep private school students out of Oxbridge or vice versa. So it's something that's much more drummed up by the media than it is a reality. Yeah.
Again, I always say to students, don't be thinking about the competition. Well, do be thinking about the competition, but don't spend all your time worrying about who else might take your place. Spend your time worrying about how to make sure that you are the right person for that place. And that is time much more effectively spent. Yes, there are discussions to be had about sort of access to university, but like Matt said, if you're the strongest person for the place, you'll get it. Doesn't matter too much about your background, you'll get it. So just make sure that you are.
Yeah, the other thing to take into account there is that you're only one person applying, unless you have twins, which very occasionally happens. I can only think of 2 instances of people I've ever met where that was the case. There's only one of you. And so what looks like an enormous daunting percentage really isn't going to impact on one person at the population level. These things have meaningful effects, but there is ultimately just one person there. So it's not worth worrying about on that basis. And there was a similar question about limits on courses from particular schools. Again, no. I recall when I was at King's, in fact, that there were, I think, 3 people from my school, which was a little embarrassing, as it wasn't all that big a course, but they clearly hadn't put a cap on. And some more people showed up from my school the following year. So it was just a question of taste there, I think, as well. And we had some questions about the BMAT essay. I don't believe they're likely to be asked about the BMAT essay in the interview, Rohan, right?
Actually, BMAT essays do come up, less so at Oxbridge, but they're definitely fair game at universities like Imperial, UCL and Leeds. So a general piece of advice is whatever you wrote down in the BMAT essay, as soon as you come out of the exam, you should write down your main topics so that when you're going into your interviews, you can revise them.
Yeah. It's the same for something like the TSA, any subject with an essay. So I didn't get asked about my TSA essay, luckily, because I didn't write it down and totally forgotten about it. But it can be. It really depends on the admissions tutor at that college. If they like to talk about it as a way to sort of assess students, then they will. If they don't think it's that helpful, then they won't.
Yeah, one of my supervisors was actually the late Roger Carpenter, and he actually invented the beamer in 2003. So he used to love it. So one of my colleagues, he kind of used to love using the beamer, and the frequent phrase he used to say is, "I think you missed the point of this essay, my boy," which always put us on edge.
Well, there you go. We know who to blame for all of this. We've got a couple of questions about interview prep, areas of focus in medicine, and sort of general non-subject specific questions. Obviously, it is helpful to know why you want to go to Cambridge, even if they don't specifically ask you. You're unlikely to be asked, "Oh, why did you choose Trinity College over John's College?" Because that's a weird question that you're not going to have an opinion on. So that's unlikely to come up. It's also quite possible they won't ask you why you want to go to Oxford or Cambridge. It'll be about the course, why you want to study in this particular place, to study these particular courses in this particular setting. But ultimately, you do need to know why you want to go. Not just because they'll ask, but because it will shine through in your application. If you don't really want to be there, as I've known people apply to Oxford without really wanting to go because their parents were very keen on the idea. If you don't know why you want to go, they will notice. So even if you're not specifically asked, you should know why you want to go and why you want to do the course.
Yeah, and actually, a couple of weeks ago, I had a couple of parents who were really keen on getting their child into medicine. They were in Hong Kong, but the student just definitely didn't want to do. They wanted to go for natural sciences, and that was a very difficult conversation. And this is why we speak to parents, because often students will tell us things that they perhaps won't tell their parents. Matt, I think we'll start wrapping up. If you could do the honors one more time and just show people how to book a consult with us.
Yeah.
And Will, you can take your favorite remaining questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one about Cambridge College has mentioned an article to discuss during the interview. This is quite a common thing done for interviews, having some kind of resource or material, some kind of reading beforehand. For my interview at Wadham, I was given a research paper to go through for about 15-20 minutes before going into the actual interview. Now, I was pretty thrown off because I went into the interview ready to talk about the research paper, and they picked it up and put it to one side and started asking me about other things. And then sort of fast forward 25 minutes, then they picked it back up and put it down again, and I'd forgotten everything that I'd been thinking about. So it's worth bearing in mind that that might happen. In terms of preparing for it, practice. If you haven't been reading articles, start reading them. Get used to reading them and reading them consciously, you know, not just absorbing the information, but critiquing it as well. You know, what do you think is right there? What do you think is wrong? Why? It may even be helpful to write reviews afterwards to get yourself into that practice, into the rhythm of that. And that's obviously specific to all subjects, really. Matthew, you're asking about what I said about the engineering candidates. I used engineering as an example because their interviews are quite regimented, or at least the start is. And there are a few subjects like this. You know, yes, NatSci do that as well. You know, that they do have a bit of regimentation, because with math-heavy subjects like engineering, like NatSci can be, sometimes that's just the best way to do it. But generally, you know, even though I said engineering, it's a bit more answer problem, they will still, you know, they are still looking for that problem-solving ability. It's just a bit more regimented. So don't feel like you should be approaching those kind of things completely differently. They're still looking for the same kind of skills. It's just in a different modality, a different subject. I'll do one more. Any specific?
So whilst Will is choosing, we've answered more than 100 questions today. If we didn't get around to answering your question, then please do book in a consult with us, which you can do by going to UniAdmissions.co.uk. So Will, what have you chosen?
Oh, he's frozen. While Will's frozen, I'll quickly answer this question. Nethmi asks, to what extent are you compared with fellow applicants from